her
What if the
famous
silver
hair.
screen's most
She used
dazzling
dry
goddesses
chocolate.
were actually
She
walking
licked her
biohazards?
fingers, lived
Beneath
colonies
the
of
diamonds,
bacteria.
satin gowns,
Another
and
disaster
perfect
had a
close-ups, a
She
hidden
wore the
layer of
same
neglect and
stockings for a
outright
week.
filth
Novak
clung
did
to
not
some of the most
believe in
famous
deodorant.
women in
She thought
Hollywood history.
antiperspirants caused
Bad breath
She called
that
it
could
her
wilt
signature
flowers.
scent.
Unwashed
Queen of
hair
nasty
stiffened
hygiene
by
sits
days of
proudly
oil.
on her
No
filth. Added
deodorant,
powder
no
to the
soap,
oil.
no shame.
Her scalp itched
These are not
constantly.
rumors whispered
She
by
scratched-
jealous
A biographer
rivals.
claims
They
she
are
washed.
documented
Sometimes she
habits,
turned them inside
confessed
out
by
to save
stars
time on
themselves
laundry. She said
or
she has
witnessed by the
never
people
washed
who
her
worked
face with
beside
soap
them.
in her
From the
entire
silent era
adult
to modern
life.
red
She was a
carpets,
biohazard.
35
Clara
actresses
Bow grew
turned
up in
personal
extreme
hygiene
poverty
into
and
an
Brooklyn,
afterthought.
so she simply
Some
didn't
feared
bathe for
water.
days at a time.
Some
Folklore.
considered soap a scam.
The original
Some
it
forgot to
cleaned them
flush.
instead of a toothbrush.
And a few
Yellow
were so
from
committed to their
cigarettes and
natural
coffee.
scent that
She
their
had multiple
co-stars begged
nasty
studio
habit was
executives
rebellion
for gas
against basic
masks.
science and
The
common
most
sense
shocking
caused
part,
cancer
the
and other
biggest
terrible
icon
diseases.
may have been the most
So
foul.
she never
Simply
washed
do
her
not
face
click
with
away.
water.
What you are
ever.
about to hear will
She
change how
legacy
you watch
shines
classic
bright on
films forever.
screens.
We
That
begin with the
washcloth
woman
was
whose
never
face
washed,
defined an
included
era,
a washcloth
and whose
or
bathroom
soap. In her
habits
later
left her
years,
husband
Betty
checking the
became
toilet
homeless
before
after
he
she
dared
claimed
to sit
water
down.
ruined her.
Marilyn Monroe is remembered as the ultimate blonde bombshell, but behind that breathy voice and perfect smile was a personal hygiene record so dire it could make a sanitation worker flinch. Monroe rarely took a real shower or bath. Instead, she used a sponge at her bathroom sink, month after month, the same sponge, never replaced, never cleaned. That sponge became a breeding ground for mold and bacteria, yet she pressed it against her skin without a second thought. She refused deodorant completely, claiming it clogged her pores. Her natural body odor was so strong that her third husband, playwright Arthur Miller, once tried to romanticize it as a wild rose garden. The truth? People who shared enclosed spaces with her said she smelled more like a barn after a rainstorm, heavy with sweat and stale perfume. Her hair was another casualty. Monroe often arrived on set with greasy roots, leaving the studio hair department to pile on dry shampoo until the oil was hidden under a layer of powder. Underneath those iconic platinum curls, her scalp itched constantly. She scratched with fingernails that were rarely cleaned, and beneath those perfect white tips lived entire colonies of bacteria. But the most stomach-turning habit was one her second husband, Joe DiMaggio, knew all too well. Monroe refused to flush the toilet after using it, especially after number 2. She considered the sound unladylike, so she simply left the evidence floating in a bowl. DiMaggio learned to check before sitting down, and more than once he found an unpleasant surprise waiting for him. Her bed was no cleaner. Monroe slept on the same sheets for months, never changing them even as they accumulated sweat, old makeup, and other bodily fluids. She called it her nest. On August 4, 1962, she was found dead in that unwashed bed, wearing a nightgown that had not been changed in days. The world lost a star, and the room lost any trace of fresh air. But as shocking as Monroe's story is, it pales next to a modern actress who admits she hasn't used soap on most of her body, and is proud of it. Cameron Diaz once sat on the throne of Hollywood's clean girl image, but she has admitted to habits that would make a plumber question his career. Diaz does not wear deodorant. She believes it causes breast cancer, despite zero scientific evidence, and she doesn't care about the proof. Her underarms are left to release their full natural bouquet, which those close to her have described as overpowering. She also does not wash her face with soap, ever. In fact, she has said she has not washed her face with soap in her adult life. She removes makeup with a dry towel, leaving behind layers of old product, dead skin, and accumulated grime. She calls it a protective barrier against aging. Others would call it a crust. Diaz showers every 4 days at most. Between those showers, she sprays dry shampoo into her hair until it forms a thick, white paste. She picks that paste out with her fingernails, then wipes her fingers on her jeans. Those jeans are never washed. She freezes them in a bag to kill bacteria, but freezing does not kill odor, it preserves it. When the jeans thaw, the stench returns stronger than before. Her feet are a separate disaster. She refuses to wear socks, and the inside of her shoes has turned black from foot dirt and sweat. The combined effect is a smell one former colleague compared to a dumpster behind a cheese factory on a hot summer day. Diaz has never apologized for any of it. She is rich, famous, beautiful, and unbothered. But the next actress's tragedy was not a lifestyle choice. It was a downward spiral that ended in one of Hollywood's most heartbreakingly filthy deaths. The woman who sang Over the Rainbow was fighting a private war that made basic self-care nearly impossible. Judy Garland's drug addiction consumed her final years, and one of the clearest signs was her refusal to bathe. She would go weeks without a real shower. The body odor that built up was so intense that co-stars went to directors to complain. Garland simply laughed and said, "I'm an artist. Artists smell." That was not a joke, it was a confession. Her dental care was equally catastrophic. She rarely brushed her teeth, which were already stained yellow from cigarettes and coffee. Instead of toothpaste, she used whiskey as mouthwash. The burn felt like it was working, but it was just stripping away enamel and leaving her breath capable of knocking a buzzard off a meat wagon. She never visited a dentist, even as cavities multiplied. Her stage costumes were not washed between performances. She wore the same dress for an entire tour, and that dress developed a permanent sweat stain under each arm. She called it her lucky stain. She also wore the same stockings for a week at a time. The smell from her dressing room made stagehands gag, and at least one quit rather than go back inside. But her most infamous bathroom habit was refusing to flush after using the toilet. She said the sound embarrassed her, so she left her waste floating in the bowl for someone else to find. Co-stars learned to avoid her private bathroom entirely. On June 22, 1969, Garland was found dead. The coroner noted her unwashed body and a nightgown that had not been changed in 2 weeks. The woman who sang about rainbows died in a cloud of filth. Up next, a Hollywood titan whose armpits could clear a room from across the set. Bette Davis had eyes that could kill at 50 paces and underarms that could knock you unconscious from across the room. She treated bathing as a dangerous ritual. 1 bath per week was her limit, and even that required assistants to beg her into the tub. Davis believed water weakened her immune system and left her vulnerable to disease, so she avoided it whenever possible. For daily cleaning, she used a washcloth on essential areas only. That washcloth was never washed or replaced. It lived in her bathroom for months, changing color from gray to black to sickly green. She never noticed or never cared. Her heavy cigarette habit added a thick layer of smoke to her body odor. The combination was described by her longtime rival Joan Crawford as smelling like a dead raccoon wrapped in an ashtray. Davis thought that was hilarious. She also refused to wash her hands before eating fried chicken. She touched her face with those greasy fingers, and then she touched other people. Her underwear routine was just as bad. She wore the same pair for 3 days. Day 1 normal, day 2 inside out, day 3 backwards. Only on day 4 did she reach for a fresh pair. After a severe stroke in her final years, Davis stopped bathing completely for her last 6 months. Nurses had to wear masks and gloves just to enter her room. The same woman who dominated every scene she was in had become a biohazard no one wanted to approach. Next, a violet-eyed queen whose love of diamonds and designer gowns did not extend to the simple act of using soap. Elizabeth Taylor collected diamonds, husbands, and apparently layers of grime. She bathed once a week, and she relied on expensive bath oils to cover the fact that she wasn't really washing. The oils made her skin greasy, and dirt stuck to the grease. She looked, as one observer put it, like a dirty diamond. Taylor refused to wear deodorant because she claimed it ruined her designer gowns. As a result, her underarms soaked through those gowns with sweat, leaving visible stains that studio retouchers had to paint out of photographs. Her famous dark hair was washed only with dry shampoo every 3 days. The powder built up on her scalp until she developed dandruff, flakes the size of potato chips. She flicked them onto the floor without a second thought. After eating chocolate, one of her great loves, Taylor never washed her hands. She licked her fingers clean, then touched other people's faces. Friends learned to flinch. In her later years, as she used a wheelchair and needed more care, she still refused to shower. Nurses reportedly had to bribe her with diamonds just to get her near water. She died in 2011, and only then was she truly clean, because the embalmer made sure of it. But Taylor wasn't the only red-haired goddess with a film canister's worth of dirty secrets. The next woman's famous hair was a greasy helmet that even dry shampoo couldn't save. Rita Hayworth's face could launch 1,000 ships, but her body odor launched 1,000 complaints. She rarely bathed during her film career because she believed water would ruin her famous red hair color. By day 2 after a rare wash, that hair was so greasy it looked wet under the studio lights. She piled on dry shampoo powder, but it just clumped into oily patches. From a distance, she looked glamorous. Up close, she smelled like a deep fryer. Hayworth also refused deodorant, saying it gave her rashes. Her underarms sweat soaked into her costumes, and the wardrobe department dreaded every fitting. She did not brush her teeth before kissing scenes. Her co-star Glenn Ford later said kissing her was like kissing a trash can. He wasn't joking. Her feet were another disaster zone. She wore high heels without socks, and the dirt on her feet turned them black. She called it a natural tan. When Alzheimer's disease hit her in her 40s, her hygiene collapsed completely. She stopped bathing altogether. Her daughter, Yasmin, had to force her into the shower. Rita Hayworth died in 1987. Her body was clean at the end only because someone else did what she would not do for herself. But Rita wasn't the only woman Frank Sinatra loved who had a complicated relationship with soap. The next star smelled so wild that even Gregory Peck described her in terms usually reserved for animals. Ava Gardner was the woman Frank Sinatra loved, and she also loved being dirty. She took 1 bath per week, and when she finished, she offered the same bath water to her dog. The dog refused to get in. That should tell you everything. Gardner never washed her face before bed. She slept in her makeup every single night, and her pillowcases turned brown over time. She didn't change them for months, insisting fresh sheets were for hotels. Her body odor was powerful enough to make flowers wilt. Gregory Peck said she smelled like a wild animal, and he meant it as a compliment, but only because he was too polite to say, like a farm animal. She never washed her hands after eating fried chicken. She wiped them on her dress, and that dress went unwashed for weeks. Grease stains attracted bugs, and she didn't care. Her homes were just as bad. Dirty dishes piled up, trash overflowed, and she never cleaned any apartment she lived in. When she died in 1990, her London flat was so filthy that cleaners refused to enter without hazard suits. The next actress had the opposite problem. She was obsessed with a clean house, but her own body was a completely different story. Joan Crawford was known for her terrifying obsession with a spotless house, but her own body did not get the same treatment. She rarely showered. Instead, she took sponge baths at her sink every 3 days using the same sponge for months. That sponge became a bacteria farm, and she never replaced it. She washed her hair with vinegar, leaving her smelling like a salad that had been left out in the sun. Crawford also never washed her hands after using the bathroom. She believed her hands were clean simply because she was a star. Co-stars refused to shake hands with her. Her breath was legendary for its foulness. She had gum disease but refused treatment, relying on strong mints that only added a minty layer on top of rot. Her famous shoulder pads were never washed. They absorbed years of sweat, turned yellow, and smelled like death. Crawford died in 1977. Her daughter Christina wrote that the funeral home had to use extra perfume to make the body presentable. The mommy dearest star demanded a clean house, but lived in a dirty body. Next, a Swedish enigma who wanted to be left alone, and left unwashed for weeks at a time. Greta Garbo wanted to be left alone, and she also wanted to be left unwashed. She hated showers with a fierce intensity and took a bath only once every 2 weeks. Even then, she shared the water, but not in the way you might think. Her mother bathed first, then her sister used the same water, and finally Greta climbed into the gray, cloudy soup. She didn't mind at all. Garbo never wore deodorant, not once in her entire life. She believed body odor was natural and beautiful and honest. John Barrymore said she smelled like a Viking who hadn't seen a fjord in a decade. She also never washed her collection of silk scarves. She wore the same scarf for years, letting it absorb neck sweat until it became stiff as cardboard. She called it her lucky scarf. She never brushed her teeth at night. In the morning, she wiped her teeth with a dry cloth, no toothpaste, no water. Her breath was infamous throughout Hollywood. Garbo thought cleanliness was vulgar and American. She was European and above such things. She died in 1990 in her New York apartment, which had no soap in any bathroom. She had removed it on purpose years earlier. The Queen of Solitude died as she lived, dirty, smelly, and completely alone. Next, a brilliant inventor and screen siren whose bathing schedule was 1 bath per month. Hedy Lamarr was called the most beautiful woman in film, and she had a brilliant mind for invention, but no brain for bathing. She took 1 bath per month. That is not a typo, 1 bath every 30 days. Lamarr believed frequent washing removed her natural magnetism and sexual power. She used expensive French perfumes to cover the mounting stench, but those perfumes mixed with month-old sweat to create what one neighbor called a chemical weapon. Her wealthy Beverly Hills neighbors actually filed complaints about the smell drifting from her home. She washed her famous dark hair once every 6 weeks. The styling products made it look gorgeous, but underneath was a greasy, matted mess. Lamarr also never flossed. She used a sewing pin to pick food from her teeth, the same pin she used for sewing buttons, and she never sterilized it. Her gums bled constantly, and she thought that was normal. In her later years, as her mental health declined, she stopped bathing completely. She wore the same dress for months and was banned from shops because of her odor. She died in 2000 at age 85. Her son said she had not bathed in the final 2 years of her life. Next, a German seductress whose legs had not touched soap in decades. Marlene Dietrich wore men's suits and smoky eyeliner, but beneath all that glamour was a dirty secret. She never washed her legs, not once. She believed soap on legs was completely unnecessary. She only cleaned her armpits and private areas with a damp cloth. Her legs developed a thick, visible layer of dead skin and ground-in dirt. She called it her natural armor against the cold. Her feet were never washed either. She wore the same silk stockings for a week without changing them, and the smell could clear a theater in under a minute. Dietrich also kept used tissues in her designer purse for months. The purse smelled like a sinus infection mixed with old perfume. She refused to wash her personal coffee cup for 10 years, claiming the stains added flavor. After a fall left her bedridden for 12 years, she rarely bathed. Nurses had to fight her just to change the sheets, and she screamed at them in German. She died in 1992 at age 90. Her body was so dirty that the embalmer had to scrub her for 3 hours before any work could begin. The next actress's final act was tragic, and her unwashed body was found in a nightgown she'd worn for 2 weeks. Lupe Valles was called the Mexican Spitfire, and her personality lit up every room she entered. Her hygiene, on the other hand, emptied rooms after she left. She took 1 bath a week, cold water only, no soap, no washcloth, no scrub brush, just 30 seconds of splashing. She believed soap was for poor people who couldn't afford natural oils. Her body odor was so strong that stray dogs followed her down Hollywood Boulevard. Valles never brushed her teeth. She chewed mint gum to freshen her breath, but never worked. Her mouth smelled like a sewer pipe, and several cavities turned completely black. She never saw a dentist. Instead, she pulled 1 rotten tooth out herself with a pair of pliers from her kitchen drawer, without numbing the pain. Her underwear habit was just as extreme. She owned 10 pairs total. She wore 1 pair for 7 days straight, then threw it in the trash. She never washed underwear. She simply bought new ones when she ran out. In 1944, Valles died by suicide, overdosing on Seconal sleeping pills. Her body was found in bed wearing the same silk nightgown she had worn for 2 full weeks. She died dirty and alone. The next woman fought the studio system with fury and fought soap with equal passion.